Hello, this is the 5th video in the PDF Knit Along series, and it covers part 4 of the pattern. Now, part 4 of the pattern is entirely about your edges. Those front edges, are they going to become a pullover or are they going to become a cardigan? You're going to finish those off in this section. That neck edge, are you going to have a narrow garter stitch edge, or are you going to have a wide ribbed collar, or are you going to have a hood? You've got to decide and finish it in this section. Now, throughout the knit along, I have been working on 3 different garments precisely so that when we get to this video, I can show you everything that you need to know. Let's begin with the discussion of the pullover. For those of you who did not work shaping in part 3, you need to first transfer some stitches from the end of needle 1 to the end of needle 2, and this will be your neck opening. You're just catching up to something that the people who worked the shaping have already done. So do that. And the other thing that everyone needs to do who's making a pullover is count your stitches between the ends of needle 1 and the markers. So the left front edge and the right front edge, you need to make sure they have the same number of stitches. Now, the first thing everyone will do, cardigan or pullover, is work a row of stitches on needle 1. And for those with a cardigan, needle 1 will begin up here, and those with a pullover, it'll be beginning down here. You're going to work one row beginning at the left front edge and traveling around to the right front edge. Now, if you worked a shaped version, you're going to have to pick up some stitches along the way, and here is how you do that. I've knit along the left front edge, and now I need to pick up some stitches along the side of this length extension here. And everywhere in the pattern where I have you work in rows, I tell you to knit the first and final stitch of every row. And the reason is it gives this nice little edge of purl bumps, and that is an ideal place to pick up stitches. So this is how you pick up a stitch in a purl bump, and I'll show you 2 ways. The first, you insert your right needle into the purl bump, wrap and pull through a loop. The second way is to put the left needle under the purl bump and then just knit it like a regular stitch. Whichever way you're more comfortable with, it doesn't matter which, but that's the best way I know to pick up a stitch along an edge. If you worked a straight version in part 3 and you're making a pullover, then you need to work 2 rows before you can join the 2 sides together. And this is so that you'll have enough of an edge to pick up stitches into when you are doing your neck finishing. You've established your stitches and you've confirmed that you have the same number of stitches along the left front and right front edges. You're going to join the 2 edges together with either a 3 needle bind off or a zigzag bind off. It's entirely a matter of your personal taste. Here's how you work them both. Zigzag bind off. This is the left front edge. Back here is the right front edge. I've confirmed that both edges have the same number of stitches. So the working yarn is attached to the top of the right front edge. And I'm going to begin holding the end of needle number 2 as my 3rd needle. You begin by knitting the first stitch on the front needle. You slide it off the end. And then you purl the first stitch on the back needle and slide it off the end. And then pass the first stitch that you worked over the second stitch that you worked. Knit one from the front, pass it over, purl one from the back, pass over. Knit one from the front, bind it off, purl one from the back, bind it off. And you continue in this way, always working the front stitches with a knit and the back stitches with a purl until all of the stitches have been worked. This is the completed zigzag bind off. Once you're done, switch to smaller needles and just continue right around to do the lower edge finishing. How you work a 3 needle bind off. I'm holding the end of needle 2, insert the tip into the first stitch on the front needle and then the first stitch on the back needle and pull a loop through both stitches and slide off both stitches. Now, I will often do a wrap like for Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off when I'm working a 3 needle bind off, but in this case I don't. I don't want to have the extra bulk. So just go ahead and work the second pair of stitches the same way as you did the first, pull a loop through, and then pass the first stitch worked over the second stitch worked. And be careful not to let this get too tight on you. And just continue in this way until you've worked all of the stitches. And again, when you're done, don't break the yarn because you're going to go straight into the lower edge. Here is the completed 3-needle bind off. And here are the 2 bind offs side by side so you can get an idea of which you prefer. Those of you making the hood or the wide collared version, your patterns tell you to evenly space increases or decreases along the neck edge. And I want to talk to you about evenly spacing these stitches. For years, what I would do when I saw the phrase evenly space is wing it. And I'd throw in an increase or a decrease wherever I felt like it. And I'd get to the end of the row and I would count my stitches and realize they were wrong. And then I'd rip it back and I'd do it again. And I'd count my stitches and realize I was wrong. And I'd end up spending hours trying to get the correct number of stitches. Now when I see the phrase evenly spaced, I do a little bit of math. So if you would like to think instead of tink, this is how you can do the math too. I know, I promised you some math, but first let's think about what's happening when you evenly space your increases. And what I'm going to do is use this celery to represent a row of stitches. And let's say I want to evenly space, just say 3 increases. So here comes my increases. I'm going to press 1, put 1 there, 1 there, 1 there. I've evenly spaced 3 increases. But I have 4 pieces of celery now. So the first thing you need to do is remember that 3 increases is 4 spaces. If you have 15 increases, it's 16 spaces. If you have 27 increases, it's 28 spaces. You are going to divide your stitches by your number of spaces, not the number of increases or the number of decreases. Okay, so the next thing that you need to know is if you are evenly spacing decreases, a decrease means that you take 2 stitches and turn it into 1. So all right, say this represents 5 stitches. You're going to work 1, 2, 3 stitches, and the last 2 are going to be joined together to make a 4th. So whatever number of stitches you're supposed to be working in here, subtract 2. That's the number of stitches you work in pattern before you work your decrease. All right. I'm going to put the celery away now, and we're going to take a look at the cardigan I'm making that's going to get a hood. And I'm going to show you how to space the increases on that. Let's take a look at the numbers for the cardigan. I'm going to be making a hood, and I'm starting with 35 stitches along the neck edge. And into these 35 stitches, I want to work 16 increases evenly spaced. So 16 increases is 17 spaces. Spaces are where you're going to be just knitting until you get to the next place where you make an increase. So I'm going to divide 35 by 17. And I'm going to end up with something pretty close to 2 stitches in every gap before you work an increase. What I like to do is work about 3/4 of the way across the row and then count and see how I'm doing. And this will allow me to fine-tune things there in the last quarter of the row so that I only have to do this once. So what do you do if you have a decimal? Because stitches come in whole numbers. You don't have a half of a knit stitch. So what you will do then is work 3 stitches. In this example, you would work 3 stitches in increase, then 4 stitches in increase, and then use that last quarter of the row to fine-tune things. Let's try another example. Say that we started with 35 stitches, and I needed to work decreases here. So let's say I needed to work 6 decreases into my 35 stitches. Well, 6 decreases means 7 spaces. So 35 divided by 7. That gives me a nice even, nice whole number of 5 stitches between decreases. And remember that a decrease means that you take 2 stitches and turn it into 1. So I'm going to subtract those 2 stitches off of the 5 to begin with. So my row for this would look like knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 3, knit 2 together, and so on and so forth till you get to the end. This is my cardigan, and here is needle 1. It comes all the way down the left front, around the bottom, and up again up the right front. And I've worked my establishing row, so the yarn is live here. And now it's time to deal with that neck edge. So the first thing you're going to do is pick up one stitch in each purl bump along the top of that front edge. This is what you worked in part 2. Now you're going to be, I'm going to be working increases back here along the established neck stitches, but I don't want you to work on increasing here. I really just want you to pick up one stitch in each purl bump all the way across the front. And that's because this is going to be right at your face, and you don't want to have your fabric puckered in there. So pick up one stitch in each purl bump along the top of the right front edge, work across the established stitches along the neck edge. I'm going to be working 16 increases as I do this, and then pick up one stitch in each purl bump along the top of the left front edge. I've chosen to work a hood on my cardigan, and this is what it looks like just before I work the 3-needle bind off that creates the seam on the top of the hood. The hood is worked in 4 segments. You work an even section, then an increasing section, then another even section, and then finally a decreasing section. And you're going to end up with the same number of stitches that you started with. So this is what it looks like in silhouette once it's done. Alright, so once you have completed all the knitting for the hood, you work a half a row, which will take you to the center, and a single decrease. And that'll give you an even number of stitches. Then fold it in half so that the wrong side is out and work a 3-needle bind off. And that will finish your hood. When you're done, do not break your yarn because you can go straight into the edge finishing. The cardigan, the last thing you do in part 4 is work a garter stitch edge around the entire perimeter of the garment. I've written it as a 4-ridge garter stitch edge. If you're putting in buttonholes, you may prefer to make yours wider. And the other thing you need to know here is that anywhere you have a sharp corner, like here where the front meets the lower edge, you're going to work an increase, and make one increase on each side of the corner. I have decided that this is going to be closed with a zipper, and that will be taken care of after the garment is blocked in the finishing. While making the video for part 4, I realized that I was short a sample. That I needed a 4th garment to be able to show you how to place buttons on a cardigan and how a narrow collar would look on a cardigan. So I worked up a 4th sample. This is for a 3-year-old boy, and it's using the blending technique with 2 strands of Big O held at a time. So it's got like a 2.5 stitches per inch gauge. It's going to make a really nice warm coat. Anyway, I wanted to show you how to place buttons on a cardigan. Okay, and this is for a little boy, so there's no shaping. And the buttonholes are going to be placed along the left front edge. And so the first thing you're going to do when you're placing buttons is count the number of stitches between the lower marker and the upper marker. Okay? And I have 25 stitches in this length. The first step in placing your buttonholes is to count the number of stitches you have to work with. And I'm going to be placing buttonholes along the left front edge between this marker and this marker. And I have a total of 25 stitches along this edge. And the next thing you need to do is determine the maximum number of buttonholes you could place. And I'm going to be using a tight 1-row buttonhole with 3 stitches for each opening. Now, when you have the 3 stitches in the opening, that buttonhole is actually going to be using 5 stitches, and because you have to have like an anchor on each side of the opening. So obviously 25 stitches divided by 5 for each buttonhole means that I can have a maximum of 5 buttonholes along this edge. And I do actually want to use the maximum number. So I will frequently use safety pins, but I don't have enough safety pins, so I've got hairpins. And you count up along the edge, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and place a marker. And then continue on the way up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright, so the upper and lower buttonholes have to be placed at the extreme here. And the reason why you need to place these at the extreme points, you know, right up next to the marker, is they are adjacent to points that are going to be increasing as the edging expands. So you want to have them as high up and as low down as they can go, because this is going to continue to grow out. So once you've figured out where all of your buttonholes are going to be, so the groups of 5, you can then take your pins and sequester off just the 3 stitches in the middle, like that. So when you get to this point, you will work just those 3 stitches in the opening. So here's another example. You'll be seeing more of this later, but this is the Henley pullover, and I want to place buttonholes along the right front edge. I know I have 44 stitches. So the maximum number of buttonholes that I can place, they're groups of 5, is 8, because 8 times 5 is 40, and then I'll have 4 extra stitches to deal with. Alright, so what you'll do is you'll set aside groups of 5. So once again, I will mark them off. And then you need to know that the upper and lower buttonholes have to be as close to the marker as possible. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when you have a remainder like I do now, what you will do is set aside your groups of 5 and every once in a while slip in an extra stitch. Alright, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what I need for the buttonhole. Let's take care of one of the extras. So there's 6. Now I have 3 remaining to use up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not going to use an extra one there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's use an extra one now. So there's 2 remaining. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now there's 1 remaining. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alright. So now I've got my groupings set, and I'm going to set aside the 3 stitches that are going to be actually the openings. So the center 3 stitches are what's going to be left open. So here's the buttonhole edge. Skip 1. Put 3 aside for the hole. Here's the lower edge of the buttonhole, skip 1, sequester 3 for the buttonhole. Here's the lower edge, skip 1, there's the 3 that are going to be the buttonhole. To work a tight 1-row buttonhole, you're going to begin with the yarn in the front of the work, and you slip 1 purlwise, take the yarn back, slip a 2nd stitch purlwise, and bind off 1. Yarn forward, slip 1, bind it off. Yarn back, slip 1, and bind it off. Alright, so now you've bound off 3 stitches. If you're working a 5-stitch buttonhole, you would go forward and back 1 more time and bind off 2 more stitches. Alright, but I need a 3-stitch opening. At this point you return the final stitch on the right needle to the left needle and work a cable cast on. Okay, so I have 3 stitches that in my opening, so I need to cast on 4 stitches with the cable cast on. Now if you had a 5-stitch opening, you would cast on 6 stitches with your cable cast on. Alright, so there's 4 stitches cast on with a cable cast on. Then you return the final stitch cast on to the right needle and you bind it off. Okay, things are a little tight at this point, so you need to be careful to only slip 1 stitch off at the end. Alright, now yarn forward and slip 1, yarn back, slip 1, yarn forward, slip 1. So you've slipped 3 stitches. That completes the buttonhole opening. And then you continue across the row in established pattern. And the last thing you need to do before continuing, take your button and make sure it actually will go through your buttonhole. Alright? And it does. Pullover is going to get the wide collar, the wide ribbed collar. And you'll notice here that these are the ends of needle 2. and they're holding the front neck edge stitches. Well, I'm not going to be using those stitches yet, so I'm going to have to slip them so that I can begin my neck edge row here at the top of the right front edge. I'll pick up stitches along the top of the right front edge, work around the back. There may be increases or decreases for you to do. Then come around, pick up on the top of the left front edge, and then that will be the end of the row. The collar is going to be worked in 2x2 rib just around this neck edge. This is the wide ribbed collar after it's been worked. It'll look like this for both the pullover and the cardigan. It starts with a 2x2 rib, and you work half of the total length, and then work increases, and it becomes a 3x3 rib. And then you bind this off on a right side row, and you don't break the yarn. You'll end up with the final loop up here at the upper left edge. Alright, so then what you'll do is pick up stitches along the left edge, work down the front, and if you're working a cardigan, you just continue on down towards the lower edge, and then back up again to the right front and pick up stitches on the right side of the collar. So when you wear the garment, you are actually seeing what are the wrong side rows of the collar. When you knit it, this is the right side and this is the wrong side. So what I have you do when you pick up these stitches is pick up and purl them. And this is really only important if you're using a yarn that's a different color than the actual collar. And that'll prevent you from seeing a little dashed line of the contrasting yarn color when you're wearing it. If you're using the same color yarn as the collar, you don't need to worry about picking up and purling. I find picking up and purling more awkward than picking up and knitting. So when I have to pick up and purl, I will work the pickup and the purl part separately. So first, to do the pickup, I'll take the left needle and run it under the purl bumps along the edge. And remember, I get these purl bumps because I knit the first and final stitch of every row. Alright, so that just now looks like regular stitches on the needle. So then I'll come through and purl them. Alright, so that's the pick up and purl. And remember, this is the part of the collar where I'm looking at the right side when I'm working it, but when I wear it, I'm going to see the wrong side. So you see how that's a much cleaner finish than what you would see if this were visible. Next thing we're going to discuss is what to do in this section of the pullover, and that's going to be different depending on whether you are making the wide ribbed collar or making the Henley. And I'll show you the wide ribbed collar first. This is the final stitch of the left front edge, and here is the top of the join for the two sides of the pullover. And on this garment I've got the wide collar. Now between this position and this position, I need to now pick up 7 stitches. And so you're going to pick up 3 stitches on the right side of the bind off, 1 stitch in the bind off, and 3 on the left side of the bind off. And first you're going to place a marker. I've had the best results when picking up stitches if I aim for the gap between the first stitch and the second stitch. So like this. So it's a bit deeper into the fabric than I would normally work stitches along an edge. Place a second marker and then turn and work up the right front edge. The setup in the first wrong side row of the neck edge finishing, and I want to mention briefly what's going to happen with these 2 marked positions. You begin with 7 stitches between the markers, and then with each right side row you're going to work 2 decreases. So you're going to go to 5 stitches, then 3 stitches, and you'll finally end up with 1 stitch, and that'll just give you a slit straight down the middle of the garment. Now if you are working a Henley, you're going to want to have these 2 sides overlap, and that's going to be done a little bit differently. This pullover will become a Henley, and specifically it will become a woman's Henley. And for a woman's garment, the buttonholes go along the right front edge and the buttons go along the left front edge. So to set this up correctly for a woman, I begin by picking up stitches down here, and there are going to be 7 stitches that are picked up exactly like what happened with the wide collared pullover. All right, so 3 stitches picked up here, 1 in the bind off, 3 stitches picked up here. picked up 7 stitches along the top of the center. I worked up the front, placed a marker at this corner. You're going to be working increases on each side of this marker to keep the corner shaping. Then picked up across the top of the right front edge, worked across the next stitches, picked up 1 stitch in each purl bump across the top of the left front edge, and then knit down to the front. So at this point I turn my work so the wrong side is facing, place a marker, and work a cable cast on of 7 stitches. Now if you had worked a man's garment, the 2 sides would be reversed, so you would begin with the cable cast on and end with the pickup of the 7 stitches along the top of the center. All right, from this point you'll work in rows, and don't forget you need to switch to a smaller needle as well. Once again, I've worked the setup round and the first wrong side row, and I'm going to discuss what's going to happen at each of these markers. So on this garment we've got the picked up stitches along the top of the center, and then we've got the 7 new stitches cast on over here. And what's going to happen is you're going to work every row until you get to the marker, and then work a knit 3 together, and then you turn and slip and go the other way. So you're not working all stitches in all rows. Let's see, so that's every single row. You're going to have a knit 3 together at the end of the row, and then every right side row you're going to work an increase on each side of the marker at the neck, and that's going to give a nice sharp corner. One final thing, when you place your buttonholes, place them when you work row 4, which is the second right side row after the setup row. And this is not going to be a very wide band, so make sure that the buttons you select are small enough to be accommodated by the band.
To finish the Henley, use the tail from the bind off to sew the lower edge of the button band to the lower edge of the buttonhole band, and then sew on your buttons. So this is the Henley at the end of part 4, and this is the pullover with the wide ribbed collar at the end of part 4. And finally, here is the cardigan. This is the hood view from the back, and this is the front. Don't worry about the fact that the edges are kind of folded over. That'll settle out in blocking.
This wraps up part 4. I know we covered a lot in this video. Remember, if you're having any questions or if you have any problems, you can always find me on Ravelry. And as always, happy knitting!